Hey guys, this video is brought to you by Dev Mountain Coding Bootcamp. If you're interested in going to a coding bootcamp, make sure you give them a look. The link is in the description tab below. They're focusing on all the latest web development technologies that you need to get your foot in the door in the industry as quickly as possible. Hey guys, what's up? So in this video, I'm just talking about .NET, .NET Core, ASP.NET specifically, and why companies are using it, and just kind of go over the benefits of using it and some demonstrations. So why do companies flock to .NET and Microsoft products and ASP.NET specifically? The reason being is the tooling. The tooling has been built around the development environment for many decades now. Microsoft is a huge company. They've had their foot in the door for a very long time. Most computers, even today, still run an operating Windows or Microsoft operating system. So clearly they have a foothold there. Now their integrated development environment, Visual Studio, is probably the best environment when it comes to having a product that really integrates well with things like SQL Server, TFS for managing tasks, bugs, doing builds, things like that. So the tools are definitely second to none, and that's why a lot of companies are using them. People are trained in it, so since a lot of computers are using Microsoft stuff, then there's a lot of developers out there, so the developers are actually cheaper. It's more of a standard. It's not so like when Microsoft releases stuff, it's always behind the curve, it seems like, a little bit. Like for instance, when Visual Studio, for the longest time, it lacked any JSX support, even years after it was out, where we had to use things like Sublime Text and things like that to work around that. So you're never going to have the most cutting edge stuff with Microsoft, but you're at least going to have a pretty reliable product. And with something like Visual Studio, for new developers, you look at it and you're like, damn, I could read a book on this and still not know how to use it. And you could read a book on it and still not know how to use it. But the thing is you really don't need to do all that. It comes with time, but eventually you are going to pick up a lot of pieces of it, and it's just going to become second nature. And when you end up working for a company that's also using those same products, you hit the ground running. So it's there's clearly obviously this .NET environment. It's the alternative of really Linux or an Apple ecosystem. So in order to get started with Microsoft development, you have to have a Windows machine, and you're going to download Visual Studio. Visual Studio, there's a free version, which is the Community Edition, so you can get that up and running for free to actually write websites that you can actually post to Azure and everything, right out of the box for free. So ASP.NET is a web framework, and it can be thought of as the same thing as Django or Express for Node, Django for Python, Ruby on Rails. So it's the same thing. ASP.NET is Microsoft's version of that. Now, you don't have to actually write ASP.NET using C#. Now, that's what everybody uses mostly because that's Microsoft's flagship language. But you can also use Visual Basic or I'm sorry, VB.NET, or you can use F# if you wanted to, which is a functional language. It all really boils down to something called the intermediate language that Microsoft has, and that's similar to Java's bytecode. Once it actually gets broken down to this intermediate language from your actual source code that you wrote and whatever language you have, then basically there's a JIT compiler very similar to very similar to Java's ecosystem as well. They're both virtual machines. They both execute in a safe environment, basically, so you're not going to have Stack Overflows and such. But they do have the ability to execute native code on different machines. So they're very fast languages. So it's very fast. So anything that boils down to a .NET, compatible language like F# or C# or something like that, it's going to boil down to machine code, native machine code, and it's going to be very fast. ASP.NET is just a bunch of C# code that was written over the years that is using a very, very complicated class-based system of class inheritance and everything else to have a humongous library to handle everything you need when it comes to running a full-scale web application. So unlike something like the Python ecosystem with Django, with C# and .NET and Visual Studio and everything, you don't have to install any sort of framework, although there is plugins and everything I can show you in a moment. But if we were going to create a new project, you can see that we can do that here. And Visual Studio is not just used for web development. You can see that there's all kinds of stuff in here that you can actually do. You can write C and C++ using Visual Studio. So it's not like you have to use ASP.NET, and in order to use it, you have to learn Visual Studio. Learning Visual Studio could pay dividends for you if you're doing any sort of software development or game development or anything like that. So Another thing is .NET Core is now cross-platform, so you could write actual console applications or ASP.NET web applications in a cross-platform code that can run on Linux or and Mac and things like that. So that's actually new. That's cool. You can actually do a lot of mobile development through something like Xamarin, which is built into this. I've never actually jumped too much into Xamarin. I've always wanted to, but just never have found the time. Unfortunately, it was not something I was able to do day to day to be able to pick up the skills necessary. So I only dabbled with it here and there, so I never got to really mess with it. Maybe I will one day. But anyway, if we're going to create a web application, you can see that there's two different versions here. Most new development, you're probably going to be use .NET Core because that's what most people are using. And it's really just, it's its own set of libraries that are cross-platform again. And then you have the standard .NET framework. This is going to have more functionality. And I believe the latest version is like 4 dot something or another, like 4.5 something. But this is the application that most companies are probably still using, or library, because yeah, a lot of just, a lot of things don't switch over very quickly. So web forms is actually even older. So when you're building a web application, you can either build an empty project, a web forms project, an MVC. You can just build a web API. It has a bunch of starter code for single page apps and all this stuff. So there's all these different things. When you're doing an MVC app, I would never use web forms. Hopefully that stuff dies. But I used to have to write code for web forms. That was a long time ago. You could actually add a unit test project just by a click of a button, and you could add the ability to write tests and everything. The MVC application, you can say no authentication, or you can actually say work or school accounts. I'm sorry, individual user accounts is what's actually very beneficial, because out of the box it'll have OAuth authorization, links for easily integrating to something like Google, so that people can register through your site using like Google or Twitter or something like that. It's just a lot of hassle and headache that I had to set up myself for my Django website that just kind of comes out of the box for these .NET websites using Visual Studio. So in this case, I'll just say no authentication and just say okay. And I just want to show you, it's going to build a bunch of starter boilerplate code for your project. So here you can see the project code that was spun up, and inside of here there's actually two separate projects, and it does a lot for you. There's a solution, this actual solution, because a solution can be thought of as like the entire overall container for a project, really, or not even a project. Basically, it's a container that wraps projects, and then each one of these green directories here is its own separate project. So we have our actual web application, which is called Web Application 2, which is, it's a terrible name. That was the default name. And then we have our unit test project, which is named the same thing, but with the .test convention on the end. And then this is just all using MVC. So you can see that there's a controllers. You have this home controller. You have an index view, and it's just saying return view. By default, when you say return view, it's going to look inside the views folder. It's going to look for the home directory, which is the same name as your home controller. And it's going to look for the index file, and that's how it knows to actually deliver this page when you visit it. So if we go ahead and we run it, you can just press this green button, and out of the box, it works very easily. You don't have to do anything except for click a button. My computer's running slow because I have a few processes running, plus this thing's actually screen recording. So one thing that's typical Microsoft is you can see that it actually launched this Microsoft Edge browser. It's like, I never do anything in Edge, so I clearly wouldn't want to do this. But here's your basic ASP.NET web application. If you wanted to go ahead and change that functionality, you could stop this, and then you could actually just not click the goddamn thing again. I'm sorry. 1 second. All right, and then yeah, you're just going to go ahead and change your web browser to Google Chrome. So it has everything you need to just get up and running quickly. Now when I run this, I have it in Chrome, and I'm good. And by the way, when it runs the first time, it's just grabbing those files. It'll cache them the second time around, some of these basic files. Now, if you look at what is included here, and Microsoft makes a lot of assumptions about your code. It's actually just kind of throwing in things like Bootstrap. So, whether or not you want to use that or not, it's already thrown in there for you. But it's just a starter project, so it's like you can do whatever you want. You can rip all this code out. If you wanted to add a controller, it's just as simple as just right-clicking on the folder here, And in order to actually do that, you can see it's grayed out. It's because our application is running. So we're going to stop the application. I can just right click. We'll add a controller. And then inside here, I can just say it'll just be an empty MVC controller. That's fine. Then this is where you give it a name. So if I'm like music controller, that'll be the name of it. All right, so then by default, there's an index, and you can see inside the view folder, there is no index here, so nothing's going to be returned at all for the view. So because there's no view, if we go ahead and try to navigate to that directory, you can see that we get this template error. So by default, it also has a bunch of debugging information. So you can see that there's no view found, and that's just easily remedied. There's certain shortcuts that you can have, like if you right click on view, you can just the application's not running. You could right click on view and say add view, and then here it's going to by default give it a name. Just go ahead and say add. All right, and now you can see that we have that. Now, because it's MVC, because if you wanted to use, model stands for model, so that's how you define your data structure. So let's go ahead and stop the application again, and we're going to add just a quick model file. And for this one, we're just going to say, we're just going to call this one a band. So I'll name the class band. And then here, this is where we can define some properties on this. Just for now, I'm just going to give it 2 properties, and we're going to say it's a public string, and we're going to say the name of the band. And we're just setting the parameters to allow the ability to be able to retrieve the value name, as well as be able to set the value name on any sort of objects that are instantiated from the band class. That's what we're doing there. And then we're going to go public string, and then we'll just say genre, I guess. All right, so there we go. There's a bunch of like shortcuts as well with Visual Studio. You do 3 forward slashes, then you can get automatic documentation and things like that. So you can just say the name of the band. And it's always good to document your code, but there's all this stuff that, like, if it's grayed out here, it's telling you it's unused, so you can actually just remove these references that are added by default. There's actually no performance hit, though, for references that are not used. And that's because of the way that the common language runtime is executed and things like that. So if you look into it, you'll see that I'm right. John Skeet says so. Anyway, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my controllers. I'm going to use that model file that we just created. I'm going to create a new controller. I'm going to say this time I want an MVC5 controller with read-write actions. I'm going to call it the band controller. And then inside of here, when we go inside the view, I'm going to go ahead and right-click and say add view on the index, so that the main default index page of our band controller endpoint, we're going to say we want to give a template. And the index, since the index, we're going to say, the index, let's go ahead and we're going to list out all bands. So here we're going to say this is going to use the model class of a band. We could use a actual layout page if we wanted to, and I think there is a layout page inside of our shared, so we will use the layout page. And then you just say add, so it's going to build all the scaffolding for you. So one thing about making tutorials or these videos, like I just literally just stepped away from my desk for just a second because somebody was asking me something. And then I stepped back and I'm like, what did I just say? But anyway, I think I just created a template here on our band controller, and it's for the index page. And I said I wanted it to be a list format. So when we're looking at this template, you can see that what it's doing, and there's a for each statement inside here. What this syntax is, this is called a Razor syntax, and it's a view engine, just like Jinja 2 that Django uses, or Django's built-in default template engine, or Mustache, or any of those other things. Hell, even React is somewhat of a template engine in a way. I mean, I guess you could make an argument that it kind of is, so sort of, but it does more than that anyway. But so with Razor, it's not too hard. Anything with these the @ symbol is actually the way that you declare a statement that's going to be C# code. So that's how Razor understands that this is all C# code. These actual helpers are part of the MVC.NET library, and they actually, it just allows you to use these Lambda functions here to display data about the the values that you're iterating over. The model itself, you can see, is an IEnumerable, which is actually something that is going to be confusing to anybody that's beginning. But you can think of that as a list, just an iterable list kind of thing. And it is one of the many unique data types to the .NET library and the C# language. So in this case, like, how do you get this thing to then display some data? And what we would do is we would go ahead and build a list with our model. So we're just going to say var list of bands equals new list, and then we're going to say band. So not band controller, but we're going to say band. And here you're going to get an error because it's going to say, hey, we don't know what band is. But if you go ahead and click on it, and you click on this little light bulb, it actually tells you what you can do. It's saying, hey, do you want to use this? You could just use your models, and you can use the band name and model. So basically it understands what you're trying to do for the most part, but you just have to click on it. So now you're importing. But what it did, it just went ahead and added this statement here so that now you can reference any one of the files in here, the classes in your models directory, because of this using statement at the top. And that's all it did. But it knew that you had a mistake there, and you just had to click on it. It actually told you how to solve it. So a lot of like what you get out of the box with Python or even PyCharm and stuff like that is just, in my opinion, is not as good. But anyway, so here's our list of bands, and instead of just initiating the list, we can go ahead and add some values here. So we're adding a new band object, and in here we could just say name equals. I always add my favorite band, and the genre equals alternative. I always add that band because they're one of the reasons why I'm a programmer, actually. So, and we're just gonna add two bands here, and for the sake of popularity, go with the Migos, and genre equals rap. All right, so let's close off our statement there. So now that we have this list of bands, we can go ahead and return that inside the view, and because our template knows how to handle the data, because it's actually expecting the right type of data here, then you don't get any sort of error messages here. So this is going to get returned to the view. So let's go ahead and run our website here and take a look at what this is going to look like if we navigate to the page. So here's our home page, and if we go and we put in band for the name of the band controller, you can see that we have our little bands here that we've added. So we have Bayside, and if we go to edit it here, you're going to see that we have this null value ID of null. The problem is you're trying to edit and you didn't pass any sort of value, and the problem is for the sake of this video, I can't go ahead and fix all these endpoints. But if you look at how I did this with the actual index here, you're going to do the same thing. So when you go into details, you're getting an error message there when you go to edit, because you're supposed to pass in the ID of the value that you should be querying the database for, that you then want to edit. So in this case, the error message we just saw is because we requested the page without actually passing in an ID parameter, and it blew up. So anyway, that's the problem there. But you have all these different endpoints, and it just created those for you by default, because it pretty much understands it. Like, you're going to be displaying data based on data models, right? Data objects, right? And it knows that those data objects need to be edited, they need to be deleted and created and things like that. So that's what these are all doing for you. And obviously, when you have a create, you want to have the actual create page. This is going to display the form that you're using to create something, and then you're going to then post that form to, by convention, the same name, but under the HTTP post header, and then it's going to pass in all the data. So then you'd have all this data to be able to work with. So anyway, it's all very spelled out. The Visual Studio environment, there's just so much different stuff you can do. You can customize this thing. Like, there's so many different extensions and everything you can install. Just even like the color themes. Like, if you like the dark theme, you can switch it over here. You can also like get different themes. Like like the ones for, well, that is just, oh, okay. I was about to say, what the heck? Yeah. So this is actually a pretty looking theme, I think, for people that like dark. And that's actually a good topic as well. What is better, the light or the dark? I'm curious what you guys have to say on that one. I've actually switched back and forth between the two on multiple occasions throughout my career. So why is everybody using C# and .NET? It's because the companies are using it. That's where the jobs are. Why are the jobs there? Because they like the security that Microsoft provides and has provided since the 1980s. Microsoft's one of the biggest IT companies. They own the personal PC market even now. And, you know, so that's why you're like, but the unfortunate thing is that it's just so much different than I would say that, the Linux side of things. It seems like, in some cases, like the two kind of conflict with each other just for the sake of conflicting with each other. But Microsoft has made some strides lately. Like they've open sourced all of the C# language, I believe, in like the Roslyn compiler. They've created .NET Core. They took over Xamarin, which is supposed to help with like mobile development. I've heard some ups and downs about that lately, but anyway, they're working with Unity for Unity Game Engine because a lot of that, really Unity, you write your games there in C#. You can use other stuff too, but C# is by the default, I think, is the default language for Unity. Although the libraries themselves, I understand, are written in like C and C++. But yeah, anyway, guys, that's really all I have on this subject right now tonight, but I plan on doing some more. I want to do tutorials and everything on a lot of C#, .NET, Microsoft stuff that I haven't really been touching on too much, but I do plan to do that. And make sure you guys subscribe, vote up the video if you would, please. I appreciate it. I thank you for all the support. You guys have a good night. Take care. Bye.